Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely wild case study. Seriously, it's a story that starts with some pretty massive, almost cinematic accusations of identity theft, and then pivots into a really sobering realization about the whole state of modern education. It's a brilliant look at how we process failure, how the legal system demands cold, hard facts over feelings, and what actually happens when the reality of the job market slams right into an outdated academic system. So, grab your notepad, because we've got a lot to cover.
Okay, let's just jump right in. We're starting with this incredibly startling, completely unedited claim from a guy named Gobal Krishna V. See, after dealing with years of just brutal employment struggles, no real career progression after graduating, Gobal started to suspect he was the target of organized fraud. He actually theorized that security guards and bodyguards of super wealthy individuals were setting up startups and literally stealing the identities of poor graduate students to ruin their lives. Now, when you hit a massive wall in your career, it's totally human nature to look around for an external cause, right? But as we're going to see, having a gut suspicion is very, very different from actually having a case.
So let's talk about these allegations of organized fraud.
We really have to look at the massive divide between verified reality and unverified assumption. For instance, the Tamil Nadu police have actively documented and warned people about real fraud. We're talking about criminals making fake profiles on matrimonial platforms, building up trust, and then scamming victims out of cash with fake customs fees. Those are documented crimes. Hundreds of complaints, actual arrests, the whole shebang. But Gobal's allegations, they assume an entire demographic, like security guards of the rich, are systematically stealing identities. That takes a massive leap of faith. And honestly, there was absolutely zero hard proof provided to back any of it up.
And that brings us to the actual burden of legal proof. Because the law, well, it just doesn't operate on feelings or frustrations or assumptions. If you genuinely believe you're the victim of some vast identity theft conspiracy, you can't just point a finger and say they did it. The legal system requires tangible evidence. We're talking formal documents, a solid paper trail of emails or text messages, unquestionable financial records, and strictly verifiable information. Without all of that concrete stuff, law enforcement and the courts literally cannot investigate a fraud claim. It doesn't matter how strongly the victim believes it in their heart.
Which leads us to a really crucial distinction: the difference between a systemic issue and a criminal allegation. A systemic issue is about broad societal failures, like, say, a university completely failing to prepare its students for the actual modern workforce. But a criminal allegation? That involves specific, illegal acts committed by specific people, which absolutely requires individual, admissible evidence. Goebbels felt cheated, which honestly is an entirely valid feeling. But feeling cheated by a subpar education system, that's a systemic issue. Claiming a rich person's bodyguard stole your identity to wreck your career, that is a criminal allegation. You just can't legally treat a systemic frustration as a targeted criminal conspiracy without the proof.
So, how do you actually structure a formal writ petition if you want to take legal action?
Let's look at how this builds across Gobal's actual life, adapting the list of dates from his draft constitutional representation. Back in 2012, he joined TJS Engineering College for his BE in Electronics and Communication Engineering. He finished the coursework in 2016, but then had to spend an extra year clearing backlog subjects, stuff like computer architecture and wireless networks. He finally gets his degree in 2017, but then nearly a decade, from 2017 all the way to 2026, of severe employment struggles, bouncing around low-paying telecom jobs, just facing an incredibly harsh job market. Ultimately, in 2026, he prepared legal representation to seek some kind of relief. This timeline is what a court actually looks at, a factual, chronological sequence of events, not a wild theory about who's to blame.
Actually, if someone really wants to petition the Supreme Court of India under Article 32 to protect their fundamental rights, it absolutely has to follow a highly structured form. You have to start with a synopsis of the issue, then provide that timeline of dates we just talked about, lay out the verifiable facts of the case, establish the actual legal and constitutional grounds, make a specific prayer for relief, and finally sign a declaration. You simply cannot draft a petition that just throws unverified allegations at named people or companies as if they're established facts. The whole process forces you to strip away unverified claims and focus entirely on documented constitutional grounds. Things like fairness, transparency, and accountability in education.
Which brings us to the real root of the problem: the engineering education crisis. When we look at what was taught versus what was missing, it highlights a pretty stark reality. Goebbels' experience, which, let's be real, mirrors thousands of other students, was trapped in an educational model totally fixated on rote memorization. What they were actually taught was basically just how to pass exams. Even for their final year projects, students were encouraged to go to external project centers to, essentially, buy a project instead of doing original engineering work. But what was missing?
Oh, just about everything modern engineers actually need in the real world. Software architecture, simulation-driven development, product engineering, basic research methodology. He was handed a degree, for sure, but he definitely was not handed an engineering education.
And because of those massive gaping holes in his college curriculum, Goebel was pretty much shoved into the deep end of the job market without a life vest. To even survive in the software industry and try to bump up his salary, he had to go and independently teach himself a staggering list of modern tech. We're talking Java, Android, Flutter, Python, Django, Spring Boot, artificial intelligence, NVIDIA Isaac Sim, robotics, ray tracing. The list goes on. Just imagine spending 4 to 5 years in an engineering college, only to graduate and realize, wow, I have to teach myself absolutely everything from scratch just to be employable.
This massive disparity in his early career forced him to ask a really difficult but important question. Why do some software engineers pull in these massive salaries while others, performing different roles, earn so much less? Well, it really boils down to value. The market doesn't care about a piece of paper from a university. It rewards your actual ability to solve complex problems, to understand product engineering, and to create tangible business value. And that's when the realization really hit him. His struggle wasn't because some shadowy figure stole his identity. The struggle was because the education system completely failed to give him a valuable identity in the workforce to begin with.
And that realization leads to the understanding that true engineering is continuous learning.
Goebel finally realized that true engineering isn't about the specific degree you hold or the marks you scored on some test a decade ago. Education absolutely should not stop with passing examinations. It should prepare students to understand, create, innovate, document, and actually contribute meaningfully to society. So he stopped looking for some grand conspiracy to blame, and instead he embraced this relentless pursuit of continuous learning, critical thinking, and practical application. He recognized that scientific research only becomes engineering, and engineering only becomes technology through constant curiosity and experimentation.
We started this explainer looking at these wild, cinematic allegations of organized criminal fraud. But after stripping away all those unverified claims and looking directly at the cold, hard facts of the modern educational experience, we're left with a pretty heavy question. Think about it. If an engineering degree demands years of your life and drains your financial resources, but entirely fails to teach you the practical skills required to actually be an engineer, is the system itself the ultimate fraud? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.